I would put music and some audio cues in this intro, but a flounder pounders when a grounder founders a little rounder. Controversy! If you've not seen the previous part about the Fate route, I recommend you do so now. If you've already seen it, or you just don't give a shit, sorry, Mom. Unlimited Blade Works is a natural evolution from Fate's relatively straightforward morality, no longer letting it slide, but actively questioning Shiro and his ideals. Where Fate is defined by the very bond Shiro and Saber share through their interactions, conflict, eventual reconciliation, and the overcoming of their weaknesses, Blade Works is defined by conflict, not between two people with selfish motives, but by two who oppose each other. In this case, it's Shiro against Shiro. While certain characters like Saber and Ilia take a back seat in terms of characterization, others are given the spotlight, including those we never really got to see, such as Soichiro Kusuki, and certain characters who were previously introduced but weren't focused on are given greater attention, notably Rin, Archer, Shinji, Caster, and even Lancer to some extent. The tone is also notably darker, though it's not without moments of levity and slice-of-life elements carried from the preceding route. The plot makes the war a pervasive element, for sure, but there's enough free time for our cast to, say, go on a group date or go to school, though that doesn't remain the case for long. Blade Works is definitely the more matured middle chapter of the Fate Stay Night saga, but clearly maintains a light heart where it counts. The shift in tone doesn't simply become evident in how it feels to read or what happens within the plot, however. It's representative of the next step the novel goes toward exploring Shiro himself. Fate was clear-cut and easy to follow. Blade Works is where the jump in complexity takes place. Unlike Fate, there are multiple parties at center stage. Initially, it's Shiro, Saber, Rin, and Archer in the first group, Shinji and Rider in second, Caster and Soichiro in third, Ilia and Berserker in fourth. What makes the narrative comparatively dynamic and intriguing compared to Fate is that the parties shift throughout the story. It isn't too long before Ilia and Berserker are wiped out and the structure becomes Shiro and Rin in first, Caster, Soichiro, Saber, and Archer in second, Shinji and Gilgamesh in third, and you get the idea as the parties continue to shift further. As a result of this dynamic narrative of shifting parties, Blade Works utilizes more twists and double crosses than Fate ever did, having less of a mystery element where something is hidden in shadow to be unraveled, but instead aspires to go for the thriller-oriented side of Fate Stay Night. Twists that change paradigms, create new relationships, surprise the reader, and has a heavy dose of action in between it all. I can now see a part of the reason why uFotable chose to adapt Unlimited Blade Works after Fate Zero instead of starting with the Fate route. Where Fate is a mystery, slice-of-life romance novel, albeit with a thematically charged and powerful romantic arc, Blade Works is this action-packed, suspenseful, morally ambiguous thriller novel with all the twists and turns, spectacle, and the frills you may come to expect from Fate Stay Night, which clearly plays to their strengths more than a story built upon drama, comedy, romance, and dump trucks full of expository dialogue. If all of that is what you want out of Fate, this route is clearly for you. I'd argue that Blade Works is the most action-heavy, though not for the sake of it. Some are for the sake of raising the stakes of the plot, or to expound a revelation that adds a new element into the mix, such as when our main cast find out that Soichiro, who was previously believed to be a regular school teacher, is actually a fully trained, cold-blooded, deadly assassin man who knows advanced martial arts and is augmented by Caster to be quick and strong as fuck, even outmatching Saber in close quarters combat. One of the bad endings in this encounter literally has Rin having her entire head punched off as if it were a bag of jello.
ちょっとそこまで白を殺しに
Of course, there's the primary conflict that defines Unlimited Blade Works, Shiro's ideals and how it questions them, and the way it does so is by critiquing them, which is where Archer comes into play. Unlike Fate, where Archer was the cynical, mysterious, yet helpful and ultimately selfless supporting character, he's a major player in not only Shiro's arc, but is even given somewhat of an arc of his own. He is, by and large, the antithesis to Shiro, not because he opposes his ideals, but because his ideals are the same. In fact, Archer is actually Shiro from the future in a parallel timeline. Why does this guy like Archer, who is essentially Shiro and possesses his own ideals, an antagonistic figure in the route? The difference is while Shiro is a possessor of the ideals of his late adopted father, Archer is the practitioner, the result of Shiro's ideals. This is where the exploration of heroism, the route, if not the entirety of Fate Stay Night, truly begins. Archer represents a future where Shiro actively puts his ideals into action, saving people as much as he can, going as far as to create a pact with the planet itself to become what is known as a counter-guardian, a being who opposes evil wherever it comes from, at any point in time it arrives, fated to kill those who seek to create chaos over and over. Technically speaking, this is what Shiro's ideals are about, stopping evil and saving the innocent. Even after being killed by those he wanted to save, Archer kept his ideals going through the pact he made with the world. The problem is that this method of achieving this ideal, the method of continuously stopping evil through force and bloodshed throughout time, eventually led to the disillusionment of his ideals, that no matter how many people he killed, evil just kept springing up again, and again, in a seemingly endless cycle of bloodshed. He wanted to save people, and though he killed many evils to save the many, it just never ended. Archer is the fulfillment of the potential ruin Shiro could very well face by his ideals, much like Saber and how her ideals led to her own ruin, and that very same man wants to kill his other, younger self, not because he hates him, but because he wants to prevent such ruin from happening in the first place. In a twisted, cynical way, Archer's motives are inherently noble in that he wants to save himself, his other self, from the pain of realizing that there will always be pain, misery, and evil in the world. Shiro, being the person he is, goes through the ringer, not only physically through fighting, but morally, mentally, philosophically. He doesn't want to give up on his ideals, and Archer knows this, and that's what creates the conflict and, most of all, the big question presented in Unlimited Blade Works. Can Shiro's ideology work in a world as ambiguous as the one he lives in right now? It's a question with multiple layers. One of those layers presents itself when the other moral conflict in the story begins to heat, which is the relationship between Shiro and Rin. The boiled down version of their dynamic is, while Shiro is the idealist, Rin is the realist, having lost her family in the past like Shiro did. Both being orphans is already something the two can relate with. Where it gains traction, however, is when Rin begins to realize what kind of person Shiro really is. A damaged man with a skewed outlook on himself and how he lives his life. Through the deaths of his parents, biological or adopted, Shiro gains ideals and a way to live his life as this husk of a person who wants to do good things to make himself feel purposeful. Rin, on the other hand, has only looked out for herself when her parents died, to keep her own life at the forefront of her priorities and to live up to the Tosaka lineage. Someone like Shiro can only baffle her. His selfless nature, his willingness to put his life on the line when need be, how he views himself as someone who exists purely for these things, it's something that makes Rin irritated initially, but as Shiro's character grows more exposed and she learns about the man, it turns into concern for his well-being. Not least of which is the revelation that she actually has a bit of a crush on him already, and vice versa, actually. Her past didn't make her want to strive to save people like Shiro. If anything, it only made her want to continue living even more. What gives her added dimension is, despite her ideology of looking out for herself and what she stands for as, more or less, the last member of the Tosaka family, Rin is inherently a good person. Maybe even selfless in her own right. She displayed these attributes in the Fate route, whether to teach Shiro some of her knowledge about magic, offer some magic training, and to risk her life in not only the battle with Berserker, but also the kidnapping of Ilya. The part of her that does merciful or selfless actions can be seen in Blade Works as well, when Shiro and Rin fight each other in the school. She's willing to let Shiro live, but only if he gives up his command seals, which is said to be unusual when it comes to magi, and even offers to heal his wound after taking Ryder's large nail to the arm, saving her life, defining her as someone who isn't ruthless and cold-blooded, with an honor system to boot. She even tries to save an innocent student after said student had some of her life force drained by Ryder during the whole fight, willing to let certain things go to help others on occasion. But as a major focus, the route also lays down the side of Rin that tries to see the world for what it is, and that, at the end of the day, she has to do what she can to survive and win the Grail War, to always put value in her own life. After all, it is her duty to do so for her family name. So Bladeworks now has two parallel conflicts going on within: the ideological conflict of Shiro and Archer, and the human conflict of Shiro and Rin. Suffice to say, Rin's character arc is one of growth through Shiro. It's not so much that she receives new traits that positively impact who she is. Those traits already exist, as I previously said. What she does learn throughout her arc, by Shiro's example, is to have more faith and value in selfless acts. An arc that improves the traits she already has, but typically holds back, becoming a better person even to the point of risking her own life to save Shinji despite what he's done by the end. As character arcs go in the novel, Rin in Unlimited Blade Works definitely has one of the more transformative arcs throughout. Less complicated than her arc in Heaven's Feel, but more fleshed out and palpable than in Fate, where she doesn't really have much of one considering her role as a supporting character. But notice that I've been talking about Rin's arc. What about Shiro? Does he have a direct character arc? The answer is that he actually doesn't change much in Bladeworks, and it ends by leaving it open as to whether he's learned anything or not. That's typically a bad thing in storytelling. A character without a transformative arc doesn't lend itself well most of the time, though that's just basic storytelling 101. Shiro at the beginning is pretty much the Shiro at the end, and I'd fault it if him not changing much didn't serve a purpose. What arc Shiro has is about sticking to your beliefs. Yes, he doesn't actually undergo any real change, but certain people around him do, Rin especially, and the conflict of ideals with Archer is to compound his unwillingness to give it all up. His arc is minimal because the novel is testing his character, not only to the reader, but to the other characters and how it affects them. Fate took the middle ground. This route makes it a point to display his will and convictions under heavier adversity. If there's any obstacle in the road for everyone involved, it's Gilgamesh. I never really talked about him during the section about Fate because his purpose there was fairly straightforward. In Fate, he served as a romantic counterpoint to Shiro, in terms of who he is and the fact that he wants Saber for himself as well. He basically represents what Shiro would be if he was a total douchebag, not caring for who Saber is as a person or anything else about who she is, wanting her, essentially, because she gives him blue balls, which I know that's boiling it down, but in a way that's pretty much true. Or in other words, in the most super duper distilled half-joking manner possible, Shiro's the incel, while Gilgamesh is the Chad. Gilgamesh in Unlimited Blade Works, however, takes on a completely different role. He's a counter to both Shiro and Archer alike in terms of ideology, as well as being a major antagonist for the route as a whole, unlike Fate or Heaven's Feel. In a way, he's one of those evils Archer's sworn by the world to eliminate, and a cynical version of what Shiro stands for. A powerful adversary who wants to bring despair to the world because it's how the world works in his eyes. There could be no growth in humanity without suffering, the kind Shiro seeks to prevent. As antagonists go, I wouldn't find Gilgamesh in Bladeworks to be a fascinating villain on his own, his motivations being kinda generic by itself and can be argued to be a weak point when positioned this way. It's when contextualized by the greater themes of the story, however, that it makes sense, since it correlates with Shiro's overall arc, not necessarily here, but the novel in general. If anything, what I consider to be the weakest aspect of Unlimited Blade Works is, and I know this will be unpopular, Shiro and Rin's relationship. I know I said good things about it earlier, as Rin's arc is a strong one and I have good to say about it later on. It's the rest of the relationship that doesn't quite click with me the same way Shiro had with Saber. Fate made the relationship and the message of it interwoven. It's basically about two people overcoming personal weaknesses and working together to go against the odds, to change into better people. Bladeworks has the message of its relationship be of a comparatively simplified quality about valuing selflessness, compassion, and to be more optimistic about the future, with Archer telling Rin to make sure Shiro doesn't end up like him, and she vowing to do so at the end. Where Shiro and Saber learn something new or attain something new by being together and rise above obstacles at the end, Rin just learns to better embrace a side of her that isn't selfish because of Shiro's example. They're both good romances with good arcs, it's just that Fate's romance represented something much more powerful and, well, more romantic. The Fate route even has Shiro kissing Saber to signify romance, something that doesn't happen in Bladeworks with Rin. By comparison, the most romantic thing Shiro and Rin do is sit together back to back and talk about themselves and how they feel and think, and they act more like they're friends with obvious crushes with each other other than people falling in love. Love isn't the point of the route, I know, but it doesn't quite strike the same level of emotional connection this way, even if the message can still be a good one. I didn't intend to offend any fans of the Shiro and Rin pairing. After all, these are my thoughts and I'm open to alternative readings. I just personally don't see how it's any better than the romance with Saber. Besides, I suppose I went on too long about it anyway and should probably move on by saying that Unlimited Blade Works, while my least favorite route in the novel, is still a pretty damn good story in its own right. I'd even say it's better than what uFotable did with their adaptation, going for a more straight-to-the-point approach, rather than having the tendency of bloating things out for too long. The confrontation Shiro and Archer have at Einsburn Castle should not have taken 2.5 episodes to resolve. The visual novel is much more focused, and represents the route in its purest, less padded form. As a middle chapter, you couldn't really ask for a better one. I previously brought up the route's central question. Can Shiro's ideology even work in a world as ambiguous as the one he lives in right now? Rin's arc is the answer, and it says that, no, it can't, but not as the world is now. If how he impacted Rin is any indication, it's not a matter of applying his selfless ideology to the world at large, but to inspire others to value the lessons said ideology can bring. If enough people valued selflessness and the same goodwill Shiro believes in, like how it influenced Rin throughout the story, maybe then could the world Archer fought for be a possibility, however unlikely it may be. The romance isn't the best, but the message means well and ultimately makes for a damn good route from beginning to the optimistic end. It's only fitting then that the best was saved for last.